to another episode of The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books and any other journey that they might have. You can find us on YouTube. Just search for my name, Linda Maria Frank. That's me. I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. Click on my picture, and then it will take you to the videos. And we have about, I think it's now almost 200 authors who we've interviewed. So if you're a writer or a reader and you're interested in the writer's journey or some very good books, please visit our channel. We're also on Facebook. If you want to be on the show, if you're an author of a published book and you want to be on the show, please contact me through the Facebook page, which is called The Writer's Dream. So today we have two people who come from one of the most interesting places in the world, Brooklyn, New York. And our author is Rosemary Neri Villanella, which is such a pretty name. She has written a book called Duck and Cover, and it's about her experiences as a child growing up in Brooklyn. Our host is Jack Bilello, who's been here before, and he has also grown up in Brooklyn. He's the author of Bonds of War, and he is going to interview Rosemary, and I am anxious to hear about their various escapades growing up in Brooklyn. So take it away, Jack.
Well, thank you, and welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Rosemary, I was much impressed with your memoir, and talking, of course, from the point of view of a young girl growing up in Brooklyn, and here was I, a young boy growing up in Brooklyn, but you went to one of our rival high schools. I went to Brooklyn Tech, and you went to Lafayette.
Yes, I
Lafayette
did.
High School, and that was a major rival of Brooklyn Technical High School. Can you tell us, other than you as a famous graduate, can you tell us some of the other graduates that you may be familiar with?
Well, I believe that there's a rather famous guy named Larry King.
Larry King.
Yes. I'm not sure, but I believe that Sandy Koufax.
Absolutely,
was
Sandy
there.
Koufax.
Yes. And there's one more whose name escapes me, but I will probably remember it later in the
Well,
program.
I think I could help you there.
Okay.
Fred Wilpon,
Yes.
who owns the
Owned.
New York Mets.
Yes.
And there's some other they were major league ball players, but not as well known as Sandy Koufax. Bobby and Kenny Aspromonte.
Yes.
Both of who had very nice careers in the major
Yes, I
leagues.
remember Bobby.
So Lafayette, I don't know if Lafayette is still open. I had
No,
heard that it closed.
unfortunately it closed.
It closed. That was
Yes.
that was sad. That was
Yes.
sad.
Yes.
Yes. So tell me, reading your Duck and Cover, how did you get the title Duck and Cover? Why did you select that title?
Okay, it was a very, very strong memory as a child, and I'm sure all baby boomers and many people who live in Hawaii will be familiar with the idea of protecting yourself during a nuclear attack.
In light of recent events,
Exactly.
as recently as last Saturday, less than a week
Exactly.
ago.
Yeah.
And so it's become relevant and timely, that
Yes,
title today. And yet,
surprisingly so.
yeah. And your
Yes.
cover, of course, has young elementary school kids hiding under the desk. And of
desks.
course, at the time, we all did that.
Yes.
And I grew up in the 50s, came of age in the
Yes.
50s, and you in the 60s. But little did we know that they had us hiding under kindling wood by hiding under the desks at that
Absolutely
at
true.
that time. I was very surprised and found out that, as you point out in the book, that about 25% of the people in the United States in some way are connected to that bountiful borough of Brooklyn, either
Yes.
directly or indirectly.
Yes.
And we're talking about, well, 80 million people or so. That's amazing. So tell me, you were called the Bookworm.
Yes.
Did you take that as a compliment or as an insult?
I took it as a great compliment from the person whom I admired, my friend's father. And I always had a book around in front of me, and I would devour them as a young girl and an adolescent, and still to this day. And so to me, that was really nice. It was a lovely way to be thought of. Of course, it wasn't said by the teasing kids who might bully you. It was said by a nice person.
Well, tell us about some of your favorite books that you read as a child or as a young
there's a
growing up.
great reference in my book to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is the quintessential novel. It was much earlier than my experience, before World War I, I believe, and that made me feel connected in a way that I hadn't before as a young girl to wanting to read and liking that. I also loved Louisa May Alcott, especially Little Women. My mother used to read to us, even when we were older at night before bed, and she read Little Women. And so then after I went on to Little Men and read her biography called Invincible Louisa, and loved that. I loved Nancy Drew mysteries. And I think that that led to my love affair, my lifelong love affair, my husband will tell you, with murder mysteries.
Okay.
And I was a big fan of
Well,
the
as luck
alphabet
would
series.
have it, our producer and of Linda, who is our host, has
Yes.
written 4 books,
Yes.
each of whom are considered to be a Nancy Drew for meets CSI,
Yes.
and they're all mysteries about a Nancy Drew type of
Yes.
of character. So it's and very fine writing. I read each of her novels, and they were great. So that's great. But you also, I noticed, had a great impact on Peyton Place.
Oh, yes.
Now that was interesting. That Peyton Place by Grace Metelius, I believe,
Yes.
influenced you as a young woman
It
growing
was
up.
forbidden fruit, and I learned so many things from books, and a great deal of my book deals with a young person on the verge of adolescence and physical maturity, far ahead of emotional and mental maturity. And when we babysat and the kids were sleeping, we would pull out my friend's parents' book, Peyton Place, covered up and all, and we'd try to read and find out stuff our parents wouldn't tell us.
Well, yes, and you know, among Italian parents, at least in my experience, it was very difficult for them to talk about that sex word, right? And euphemistically, they called it the birds and the bees, if you remember. And I remember how difficult it was for my father to broach that subject, and my mother was prodding him, and finally he said, "Jackie, I've got to talk to you about sex." And I was like 14. I said, "Okay, Pop, what do you want to know?" So I thought that was a nice
Great
way
comeback. Great comeback.
handling
Oh.
it. But one of the most interesting parts of the book, I thought, was the relationship with your mom and your dad. And it reminded me of, in some parts, Nathaniel Hawthorne saying that in every heart there is a tomb and a dungeon. In every heart there's a tomb and a dungeon. And he meant there were deep, dark family secrets that really we don't want to reveal willingly. And they're hidden and they're buried inside of us. And sometimes they come up and out. For example, your grandpa, Neri, interesting. And I was amazed to find out that he was living in Galveston, Texas in 1900 when they had that enormous hurricane, which I think about 6,000 people died in that hurricane. Tell us about what you consider to be his deep, dark family secret.
Well, we still don't know. The jury's
That's why
out,
it's a secret.
But we suspect that he originally emigrated from Sicily and went to Galveston, which was the second port of entry after Ellis Island for Italian immigrants. A lot of people didn't know that. They went to New Orleans, they went to Galveston, and he had a restaurant there, an Italian restaurant, and he claims he had a horse who used to love his spaghetti sauce, and we believe he had to have some kind of a backer, a helper, to get the money to get that restaurant started, and we believe he was married. I've looked at old tax rolls and things that I could investigate, and we believe he had a wife, and my sister swears that's true, and she may have been a casualty of the hurricane. Nobody knows. So that's a big question mark.
Okay.
Still, because I don't know if my grandmother knew his second wife. And yeah, that's from the dungeon.
Yeah. And also, your mom.
Yes.
Growing up, there's a whole major chapter, your mom, and one of the things I noticed that you have a difficult time with people who try to deceive you intentionally or unintentionally, and people who lie are somebody that you feel completely dead set against that approach to life, people who make a habit of lying.
Yes.
And your mom, can you tell us a little bit about how that evolved in your...
Well, I believe from my mother's point of view, it was a protective mechanism, both self and children, that there are things that she had to deal with that were very dark and very hurtful and very sad. And she used the mechanism of denial, which I talk about in the book.
Yes, you do.
These things just didn't happen. Gloss over them. Don't talk about them. And she was trying, I think, a lot of times to protect us when she told her white lies. But it was very frustrating on the other side of the table as the pre-teenager, and my sister as the younger child also, not to be told the truth about a lot of things.
Yes, well, you know, one of my favorite playwrights, I think my favorite of all time, wrote All My Sons.
Yes.
And in All My Sons,
Arthur Miller.
Arthur Miller says, there's a scene in there where Kate, when the son Chris says, I want the truth, and he keeps hammering away at the truth, and Kate says, the truth. What good is the truth if it destroys people's lives? And that impressed me very, very much, that sometimes a white lie or a lie may be beneficial to protect, as you say, your mom trying to protect you from the things that happened to her, because
Exactly.
in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which you use extensively in
I
developing
did.
the plot and the story of young Frances Nolan, I think, right?
Yes, Francie Nolan.
Francie Nolan. She had encountered a life-threatening and life-altering situation,
Absolutely.
which then your mother finally revealed to you. Can you share that with us?
Yes, there was an attempted child abduction and attempted sexual attack, I guess is the word they use now.
Yeah.
We used to look up RAPE to find out what it was in the paper, and then we were horrified. But yes, that almost the same thing had happened to my mother as a little girl in a tenement in the Lower East Side. And she was saved at the last minute because her mother, just like Francie's mother, came and stopped it, and the man ran away.
Yeah,
Before
so-
anything really terrible happened.
So you could understand why your mother was maybe
Yes.
overprotective with two
Yes.
daughters. You had a younger
A younger-
sister.
I have a
so
younger
she
sister,
was,
God bless her.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that is certainly understandable
Absolutely.
in large measure. And now on the other side of that thought, I found very interesting that the intersection of your life with Mother Cabrini. Now, I had an opportunity to meet with Pietro di Donato some years back,
you did.
and he was a fascinating character. Not only did he write Christ in Concrete,
Yes,
which
I read.
was I think it won the National Book Award in 1939, beating out John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And Pietro is a fascinating character. He only wrote 2 or 3 books, but one of them was A Circle of Light, a biography of Mother Cabrini. And it was a brilliant and amazing book. So tell us how Mother Cabrini intersected in your
It was
in your
via my
experiences.
grandmother. My grandmother and her older sister were orphaned. I believe in a flu epidemic. Once again, I don't have all the details. But they were sent to live upstate at an orphanage, which was founded by Mother Cabrini, which was very different than a lot of the other orphanages. She had been a wealthy, educated woman and wanted to service the Italian-American community because we were the immigrants who were lowest on the totem pole at that time. And my grandmother got a fine education there. It was on the Hudson. The kids ran around climbing up apple trees, picking apples when they weren't supposed to, and she fell and broke her arm. And it happened to be on a day when Mother Cabrini was visiting, and the family lore, which is not in the dungeon but is in the light, is that Mother Cabrini kissed her arm and bandaged it and healed it. And that was what we were told, and she only had wonderful memories.
It's no wonder that she became a saint. And she not only she also traveled extensively in doing the same kind of life, good works in South America and Central America,
Yes.
and so on, and in New Orleans and other parts
Yes.
of our country. So she was a brilliant and wonderful example of what a true Christian is.
As
and
well
it-
as a strong woman. You
Yes,
can be both.
yes. And too often, it's true, it's nice to see not only a Catholic, but a Christian. Because too often in name, people are
Exactly.
Catholics,
A real
but,
follower of Christ.
but they may not
Yeah.
necessarily
Yes.
follow the tenets of Christ. Now, also very interesting, moving from your mom to your dad.
Yes.
Your dad, of course, certain things like the simple little things that a father could do for a child, catching lightning
Lightning
bugs.
bugs.
I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's an amazing revelation for a young child, and he taught you that. And your vacations at the Twin Lakes.
Yes.
Very interesting, I thought, Rosemary, was that we tend to see, and everybody tends to see their parents one-dimensional. Their mom and their dad. They never had a life before us.
No.
We have no idea, nor do we care what happened, the problems they had, the difficulties they had. Their mom and dad.
Childhoods,
Right,
yeah.
their childhoods, their own. So we see them as one-dimensional. And one of the things I liked about this, among the many things I liked about it, was your family vacations to Twin Lakes.
House.
And will you tell us about that?
Well, it was a wonderful place on the New York-Pennsylvania border, which charged $1 a week for your child if the parents came. And you had 3 meals a day, and it was German-American cooking. And the Cosgrove family, bless them, ran it in the summer to supplement their farming income. And we took off our shoes the minute we got there, and we stayed for 2 weeks every summer. And it was heaven on earth for kids from the city.
And what I liked, you saw your parents, your mom and your dad, as something more than one-dimensional. They were dancing and
Yes.
affectionate with each other. And they
Yes.
may even have kissed or something. You saw them
Yes,
kissing.
embraced.
To see, and to see your mom and dad doing an affectionate kiss was something that was pretty startling for me too. I go, wow, you know,
We
I
peaked.
I
they-
hadn't
yeah,
seen that. And it was
They had square dancing at the White Owl Tavern every Friday and Saturday night. And we used to kind of be like flies on the wall, my sister and I, and we'd go outside and peek in the screen door when the music started. And they were so happy together. They were Margaret and Vinny.
yeah,
They weren't mom and dad.
yeah.
And
That's a
that
good
was
point,
a
yeah.
treasure.
Now tell us about that incident when you were kicked out of the movies with your, with who, Marky, with not Marky, yeah, Marky, I think. it
No,
was.
no, he wasn't
Don-
there. I
who
was with my sister Alice and our friends, and 4 of us went with our younger sisters to see some schlocky horror movie, maybe The Crawling Eye or something like that on a Saturday afternoon.
Hammer Films, I know that was impressive.
Yes, oh yes. This wasn't a Hammer film though. This was a real junky post-atomic bombs movie. Anyway, kids were really bad on Saturdays. That was their parents' free afternoon, and they were throwing soda and popcorn and everything else. And there was a really mean usher, a male usher, as opposed to a matron. And he was trying to punish some of the kids, and he grabbed my sister, who was a little innocent and had not done anything, and dragged her out by her braid. And the kids were infuriated and ran to the back and were screaming and yelling, and finally we got thrown out. I ran home the 5 blocks and got my father, who was a big person for fairness and respect, especially for children, which is maybe why I inherited his good quality. And he marched right into the theater. He went back in his car, marched right in. He parked it legally, and he got a hold of the usher and pulled him into the vestibule of the theater, and the manager was all, and he said, listen, my daughter was manhandled by this guy. Who gave him the right to touch her? And the guy started getting, oh, well, I have to keep order. And my father said, you have to keep order? Okay, you're never going to touch another kid again. Paw. And hauled off, and we would have lost everything if it had happened now, because we would have been sued. But the kids spilled out from the back of the theater, heard what was going on, and cheered my dad. My dad said nothing, put us all in the car, and went home. And that was it. We were never afraid of him again.
Okay. Yeah, in my neighborhood, the movie was The Colonial or The Pickin', Lois Pickin'.
Yes, I know
And
The
with all
Pickin'.
due respect to Sabina, who was like the woman there was like a German milkmaid.
Oh.
She had this white costume on, and she had a flashlight.
Yes, they had
and she
flashlights.
terrorized all the kids in the movie and kicked kids out at will, you know? So I remember that, and she spoke with a thick German accent too at that time. That's a vivid memory of my own
Absolutely,
young
but
youth.
that wasn't as upsetting to us, and my father especially, as the fact that he physically, picked on an innocent.
Did you ever talk to your dad about his experiences in World War II?
Nothing special, Rosemary. Everybody did what they had to do.
That's what he would say. He's one of
Just
those
one of the
anonymous
greatest-
heroes
yes.
who was there where and when it counted
Yes.
at the time of our country's greatest peril.
Absolutely.
And I know I had 3 uncles serving in World War II, my mother's brothers, and they were in the thick of it. They were in that thick of it, an uncle in the Aleutians, one on Okinawa, one in the South Pacific on a destroyer. And thankfully, they all survived. Now, you are too young to remember this, but I was like 5 when the war ended. And I remember each of my uncles coming home. My grandfather, when the 3rd of my uncles came home, threw up his hands to the heavens and said, tonight I could sleep for the first time in 4 years. Now, when you're 5, it was amusing. But now it deeply touches me what your grandparents had to go through, what my grandparents, and the 400,000 of those for whom there was never to be a homecoming. So your father was in the Philippines.
Yes.
And suffered from malaria.
Several times. They had no quinine. The Japanese controlled the flow of quinine, so he was repeatedly sick.
Yeah.
And when he got home, it stayed with him. He had pneumonia the first year. But he gave up smoking, which was a good thing. Yeah. And he got better.
Now, were they married before the war?
Yes.
They were married before the war.
They were supposed to be married on Pearl Harbor Day, 1941, but for some reason they couldn't get the priest or somebody, so they were married on February 8th, 42, and he worked in the Navy Yard, so he wasn't taken for a while. You know, they had that order,
sure.
Unmarried guys, married guys.
You needed defense workers. We had to,
Exactly,
sure.
and he worked on many aircraft carriers.
Including, tell us the story.
The Constellation.
The Constellation.